I think we're good. Oh, recording now? Okay. We can always edit the beginning. Well, hi guys. So this is the language and pedagogy like discussion. So I'm not technically a presenter. I'm just here to sort of help move the discussion along with everybody. But I have lots of handwritten notes and ideas about kind of talking together. And so some of this is, let me turn off the recording now. And so some of this is like sort of what is the professional capacity for like Japanese language ability and what to do with it. And I think a lot of us have some experience professionally with moving ahead with our Japanese in some way, shape, or form. For example, I'm the Japanese and Korean Studies librarian at the University of Colorado Boulder. So I get to use Japanese every day. My Japanese is far from perfect. So, like at the last session, we were talking about how a lot of people think they can't get a job in a Japanese related company or something without having perfect Japanese. And that's not actually true. It does depend. If you want to do translation interpretation, of course, you have to have very high fluency. But I think the idea here is really some concepts I want to kind of put out is, and we have two Japanese professors who are much more knowledgeable than I could ever be about pedagogy and teaching and what is happening in teaching Japanese right now. But I think some things that we might want to consider is, how is Japanese language education changing? And I think another really important concept, and I bet a few of us in this room feel this way, but I would probably call myself a high intermediate Japanese speaker. And that gap between high intermediate and advanced is really difficult to cross. And so I think, you have a lot of JETs, especially who, if they're not coming to Miss and getting their translation interpretation degree, are doing the Middlebury language intensive program and making the pledge, trademark the pledge. There may not be those kinds of opportunities necessarily. And so, what does self-study look like? And also in the context of our alumni chapters, how can we support not just elementary Japanese study or introductory level Japanese study, but how can we support our returning alumni who still want to consider their Japanese studies in some way to move into that high intermediate and move on to the advanced level? Like, what might we be able to do to support those kinds of alumni regimes who've gotten really good at Japanese, but have kind of a weirdly casual, lots of grammar mistake prone Japanese, like fluent, but a little strange at the same time, right? And so I thought that those would be some interesting concepts and ideas we could sort of start with. And if that really jumps out at anybody and they want to kind of grab onto it, I'll open the floor and I'll kick us off if we don't think of anything right away.
Well, I have a question. So we have a lot of JET alums. So I don't know a lot of JET alums that actually take the JLPT while they're in Japan. Because we're all speaking Japanese the whole time we're there, and the last thing we want to do is study more Japanese, right? So and that's not true for everybody. I know there are people that take advantage, but then there seems to be this contingency of JET alums that come back and realize that they do want to take the JLPT, that's crucial for their next step, or it's just something that they wanted to succeed at, to obtain. And so how do we support that group too? Like I know people have tried like online study groups or getting together to study for the JLPT, but
it's never serious.
But it's never serious, right? And it's not structured, right? It's almost like
there's no structure.
Hire somebody to help, train or something like that. But I don't know. I'm sort of curious to see what other people have seen in their home area or region.
I can actually offer one insight. Okay. So when I was part of JETAA ANC, when I used to live in San Francisco, JETAA ANC organized, if enough JETs could pay, there was a Japanese teacher who would teach the course. And I think she made maybe like $150 or $200 a lesson essentially, but we did like 10 or 12 lessons to get ready for JLPT NIKU.
Yeah, I feel like most JET ones are either going for NIKU or EQ. Right. Yeah. So sort of crowdsourcing your funds to support somebody.
I feel like in my personal experience, a lot of JETs around me when I was in Japan were taking it either in do it for job purposes, or since they were in Japan, they were like, well, I've learned some Japanese now, so I'm gonna just try like 3 or 4, just to try it. Yeah, so I feel like here would probably be more focused on the higher level, just people are trying to like use it.
Mhm.
So I have a friend who recruits Japanese and English bilingual or near bilingual native personnel. And last time when I talked with her, they would consider JLPT N2 is okay. You can maybe get the job, but then if you have N1, then consider to be proficient, obviously. So I think as how much you know, how much you can handle JLPT could be very good one of the gauge. So that's why students here too, at me, it's like I help students who are lots of students are alumni, JET alumni, and alumni or non-alumni students are trying to get past N2 and then N1, but N1 is pretty difficult.
Even for Japanese people, it's hard. Very difficult. Yeah, and I think too, I'll throw another question out there. Is the JLPT even the right vehicle for improving your Japanese, right? Because I remember taking the JLPT and having to listen to a discussion about like, is the penguin in the bucket real or not? Sometimes your perception of reality doesn't match what you're seeing. I'm like, what is happening right now? This is a conversation no two people would ever have with each other. Like, and I think I've missed hearing it because the conversation makes no sense. But I do understand it. It's just too strange and not like a real conversation people would have. Like there's another Japanese language exam for business Japanese, I believe. I forget the name. And like, is it
JETAA is like
BJT.
BJT?
Business Japanese.
But that's like practical Japanese.
Well, and should we pursue that instead of thinking of only the JLPT, right?
Yeah.
More than twice a year.
Oh,
Like
okay.
every 2 months, 3 months. So I took that a couple times, and it seems that's a like points-based test.
Okay.
It's not like, well, you're one level or you're another level. It's like,
Oh, I see.
Oh, you get like a score.
yeah.
Like
It's not pass fail. It's okay. What is it? Are there I assume you can buy study materials, right? And the study materials are all in Japanese.
the ones I use,
Okay.
there's like a CD. It's like the typical like textbook.
You get a book with a CD-ROM. Yeah.
So how do you use that? Like once you get your score, what do you do with your score?
So they give you have like a point score, and then they give you like an explanation of, I think it's like this another like grading scale where it's like your C1 or your B or your A.
Okay.
And that has a detailed explanation of what your level means. Like, oh, you could be an interpreter, you'll be like an interpreter level, or you'll be like,
Okay.
yeah, so they break it down.
Did your test include interview speaking?
Not an interview, there was the listening and then there was an actual writing portion.
Right, there was no
speaking.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to say. JOPT does not include writing or
Right.
speaking. Therefore, even though the Japanese American companies may say N2 or above, your Japanese language proficiency level is necessary for this job for you, N2 or above. That does not mean that you can carry on conversation.
Right.
So that goes back to what you were talking about. If it's the right assessment,
Right.
tool.
And for example, in my job, I read all the time. I need to know obscure kanji. I need to know the kanji. I need to know the kanji for the 6-footed bird with 3 eyes. Like that's part of my job. That's probably not typical, right? But But yeah, like when I'm doing purchasing and things like that, it's really a reading based experience. So, but that's not every job. And our vendors can speak English, and we always speak a interesting mix of Japanese and English together, which I think is very common for a lot of us when we are sort of meeting with Japanese professionals sometimes, if it's not a Japanese all the time type of job experience, right? And I think that's a good example of like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough, right? Like, how much does your Japanese to be perfect versus good enough to do like work you need to do? Like language, like interpretation, you have to have very good Japanese. Translation, you still need really good Japanese, but at least you have the time to like check a dictionary. So it depends what people want to do a lot. But there's also the personal satisfaction part of getting good at Japanese, right? So how do you keep advancing?
As a person who has the N2 and really did use that on the resume to get into a Japanese office where I'm speaking every day.
Okay.
I'm of two minds about it, because on the one hand, I still don't feel like the N2 was, it didn't really train me all that well for that kind of environment. And I feel like I need to keep studying more in order to kind of really integrate myself into that office, like be an effective person.
Are you working with all Japanese staff?
Yes, and most of them are bilingual as well. Like they've come to New York and they do have English proficiency as well.
Okay.
And I do think the line that don't let the good be the enemy of perfect, if I said that right. Sorry.
You're good.
Yeah. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of good. Yeah. Because I think it's very much like much like we said to our students back in Japan, like you don't need to be perfect. The important part is I understand what you want and need.
We should value our own lesson, right?
Right.
I say that all the time, like, Suji, you gotta cut that.
Right. So no, to like JLPT, I thought it was necessary to get into that office. And then once I got into that office, it was entirely insufficient. So I mean, and this is just a personal anecdote, but where I find myself right now is the fact that I've made it to that position, I think is a fantastic driver for me to continue to improve.
Yeah.
And to continue to study. But I have zero interest in the N1. I don't see how the N1 will help me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
because N2 wasn't so effective for you.
no, I
so-
passed by 3 points. I got it on the resume, and that's all I will ever need.
Yeah.
But in order to be a better communicator with my colleagues, to better understand the industry that I'm in, the N1's not to help. I need to start kind of understanding the way my colleagues
This
speak.
is what Winnie was talking.
Yeah.
Right? When she was discussing on the panel, how she
The
knows 5 things and the context and the industry.
Right.
Right. And you probably need specific vocabulary to talk about the industry you're in too, which you're not going to get from like taking the N2 or N1. It's not
Unless
going
it's
to help
about
you.
penguins and buckets.
Yes, the penguin bucket paradigm.
Not many penguins and buckets in my but I think even more so than the vocabulary, because I've gotten a good amount of the vocabulary lessons here. It's more of the inflection and the way that people speak, right? I spent 3 years in Tokyo and picked up very little Tokyo then, just because one, it was difficult, and two, my colleagues were very kind and willing to speak at the level I was at, where it was like, you're studying Tokyo then, because that's what most people study when they study Japanese, and they're willing to accommodate that. Now that I'm in a more professional setting, like they are the senpai, they are the folks who have come over from Japan and are the ones making the decisions. It's the opposite. I need to meet them where they're at, which sometimes can be difficult because of that level of language that I need to meet them at. So I don't know. To bring it back, I'm more interested in the exam that you've brought up, because even if I don't need it for a professional sort of accreditation, just the practice of studying to meet that specific goal is so much more interesting to me than ever even thinking about buying an N1 book.
So as professors, what advice do you give to your students as far as being able to take the language that they've learned and then apply it in a real life career type setting?
Well, it depends on what exactly, what kind of job. If you want to be an interpreter, the better, higher your language skills in both languages, better your position. You will be placing better position at the better position. So, and then more generally speaking, the intermediate high to advanced level, that jump, the big jump comes from, in our mind, in my mind, I should say, are you a sentence level speaker, reader, or paragraph level speaker, reader? So that's the big difference between, in our mind, in the educators, language educators' mind, is this person sentence level, and is he or she or are they able to connect sentences and then maybe able to get the ideas in a paragraph like level, or are they very sustaining at the paragraph level all the time? So that's the big difference between us, between the intermediate and advanced level. And then advanced level and above, it's really the content and the vocabulary, the quality of the vocabulary, or the part, not very common, I should say. Not very common vocabulary, that's just right in the bullseye.
Because you have the structure and the architecture already. You're
Correct.
just switching out the words
Yeah.
and the content now.
Yeah, and then can you register? Meaning that, Keigo?
Yeah, of course.
So much.
But
Business.
they,
Business is very Keigo is important, because you have to deal with your customers.
and for you, maybe like what can matter in your context and all our contexts, frankly, is like, I would love to do a month-long intensive on just Keigo. And in Japan, I mean, I would die by the end, but but like there are, I bet somewhere in Japan is that kind of opportunity, not maybe here,
Right.
but if you have, I mean, there's the financial component, but like if your work would support you going to Japan to do a month-long intensive, you would probably get more out of that than prepping for a JLPT. But that's time and money. And if you're really lucky, your company will support that, at least maybe in the form of like letting you go, if not financially.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a big difference between having your foot in the door in a place where you know you're using your Japanese versus you haven't gotten that job yet and feel like you still need to make that jump a bit. So you're in a lucky position in one sense, but in the same position if you can't make any time to say go to Japan and do a month intensive.
Right. And I do think it's worth saying that I find that, I mean, this is just personal experience, but I find that unlikely, at least for now, considering that I am still at a very low level, as it were, in terms of like, I arrived back from Japan 2 years ago. I've only been at this job for 9 months now. So the odds that they would be willing to sponsor me or even just give me that much time off is quite low.
Yeah.
Your desk is still by the door.
Absolutely. My desk, my desk is very much still right next to the mail intake. And I'm the one opening them up. Absolutely. So I'd love to have this conversation in like 5 years, and I'll give you a report on that. But I mean, that sounds lovely. I think I agree. I would die by the end of a 8-month intensive Keigo.
I don't know about 8 months of Keigo, but
No, 8 weeks. It was 8 weeks was the Middlebury one.
even in Japan, for Japanese people, they get a certificate in Keigo. So
And I mean, fortunately, I'm still in, like, being by the mailbox. I'm not the one interfacing with the customers yet. So at least my coworkers, I was able to say day one, I'm very sorry in advance. My Keigo is not good. Please be patient with me. But I don't know. Well, I would love to have this conversation like 3 to 5 years. It would be very interesting.
Well, from a chapter level, like how do we support this, right?
Right.
Like, how do we support the language learning in our for our JETAA.
I think
members?
an important dynamic there, because I go back to the NC example, but the fact that you make people pay to do it means they will show up. Because if you did, if let's say you had the kindest Japanese teacher in the world who did it for free, that would actually be worse.
Yeah.
Because people wouldn't show up. Right, exactly. And so, and you want to, of course, anyone who's going to do that, you want to compensate them fairly because it's not just the time they're teaching you, it's the preparation
yeah.
time. So, I mean, that's easily like, you're thinking of it, of paying like for the class time, but that's easy, like maybe $200 an hour or something like that.
So I'm thinking from the USJETAA perspective, but I'm wondering if there's, some way that we could get a grant or some money that we could then disperse to chapters to offset the cost of doing this type of language training.
And what the chapters need to know is like you have AATJ, American Association of Teachers of Japanese. That's where you would like reach out and ask, is this something somebody might want to do? Is there a time of year this could work?
Yeah.
Here's the compensation we're thinking of offering, right? Because my colleagues who teach Japanese, they do things like that. Especially in the summer, they're much more flexible. So there's a right time for that kind of opportunity. And if the money is there to do it, like it's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah. Thank you very much for bringing up the AATJ because AATJ
Oh yeah, I know too.
AATJ has affiliates in all over the United States. So JET alumni can participate in their meetings, and then something that we can,
Even though they're not teachers.
no, anyone can
Anyone
join.
can,
Yeah.
okay.
Anyone can join. So some kind of a collaboration between JET and AATJ affiliates will be able to. We're talking about professional development. Teachers also need to be working on their KEGO and proficiency anyway. So it could be if two organizations can apply for grant and then maybe pilot it somewhere where the demand is high, and then we may be able to start
To build
that, the pathway, start the pathway.
Right.
Be a great idea.
Because you have, I think, when Jets come home and they're sort of dealing with their new identity of being, in our case, being American again, and that sort of, but that Japanese language study is like a safe haven when you come back and you're a lot less confident about yourself, and to know that like they're just like how we try to do professional job training for people when they get back. Maybe if there was a strategically timed Japanese language course that they could participate in, that would give them a lot of comfort and a lot of like familiarity, because in a way they've now become homesick for Japan. It's a really opportune time to like recruit people into that with the opportunity to develop their Japanese more, because like you said, in Japan, you're not thinking about formally studying Japanese so much. You're just in it, learning a bunch of stuff and accidentally learning to talk like a 12-year-old because that's who you're teaching. But I think there is some potential there. And I did want to jump back to one concept earlier when we talk about that, like Tabasa Sensei was talking about the jump from sentence level thinking to paragraph
I
level
never
thinking.
break it down like that, but then she said it, I'm like, oh yes, I can see this.
And I think I don't know how where this fits into the pedagogical context, but what I think a lot about is the ability, we never learn a lot about how to express our own emotions in Japanese. And like I can express myself in a very like ego poi kind of way. And my Japanese friends know what I'm saying and they know what I mean, but I can't express my emotions the way Japanese people express their emotions. And of course there's the in public way you express your emotions, but then that intimate time between friends, those are two very different ways of talking. And there's no textbook teaching us how to like show care and affection for the people that are close to us. Nobody does that at 4,000 level Japanese, your senior year of university, right? And you think about how we're like a grassroots set of people who have these very close relationships to people in our towns. And we all speak a kind of really funny Japanese English mixed together that has its own interesting intimacy. But in terms of wanting your Japanese to get better, like I've never seen anything that caters to that. It's always very business minded ultimately as you move to that higher level.
So I want to say, though, so I agree with you. But I think there's also a lot of value and magic to not having that exact specific vocabulary, because the close friendships that I made throughout my time in Japan, but also on JET, they are meaningful relationships because they took effort from both sides. So it was extra effort on my side, and it was extra effort on their side to form that friendship. And part of what is so fun and magical about that friendship is that we don't speak exactly the same language. There is that play, there is that awkwardness sometimes, there is that time when like, oh, that was really bad, I didn't actually mean it like that, or they giggle or something, but that's what the bond is created over as well, that makes that friendship so meaningful and valuable.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying, but there's value in not having that.
Yeah.
One question for all of you.
So yeah, I was thinking about like when I was listening to Takusa Sensei's explanation about, intermediate to advancement is pretty tough. Many students face. And then my question, one is related to your work business Japanese, but what do you think, which skills, 4 skills, reading, listening, writing, and speaking in Japanese would be most important? What would you think?
Depends on what you're doing.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my case, it's reading 100% is the most important.
In your case, reading.
Yeah.
In your case.
In my case, it's, I mean, 2 sides of the same coin, but listening and speaking. Just the way that the like the Americas division is structured, because we have people in other departments that are all English. It's most of my conversational communication is all in Japanese, and then email communication is in English because they want that record so that the regulators are able to like read it without translation. Which I will admit is frustrating, because when I'm reading something, I can take my time, like put a word into a dictionary if I don't understand it. But I think definitely for me personally, like the listening needs to improve, especially the Keigo. Yeah.
But you use Japanese in your job, like it's still to say necessary.
Yeah, from my experience, reading was really important, since I worked in a fairly big office, but most communication was email. So being able to like read through everything really fast, because it'd be
In Japanese.
in Japanese. Yeah, so I'd be CC'd on multiple emails, and I could tell like, okay, this is about me, like way down here. I'm that in the email, and listening, like picking up on things like the first time you're picking it up correctly.
How about writing?
Writing's definitely one of my weakest, for sure. And then especially writing emails, because writing emails has so many set phrases, like and letter writing in Japanese in general, like all the kimari monku. It's really hard because we just don't get exposed to them very much.
Right.
The good thing is that there are templates.
That's true. Microsoft Word will give you a template of a Japanese email.
Then you can just be like, same like.
Yeah.
I type in like do, and then my email at this point immediately goes yoroshiku onegai itoshimasu. Like, done.
May I?
Oh, please.
Yeah, let me speak Japanese.
Okay.
どうぞどうぞ。
今、敬語の話と、あと書き言葉の方の話がありました。敬語に関して言いますと、今私が喋っていますのが敬語でございます。ですから、何を使ったらいいということではなくて、雰囲気も含めての話ですね。だから、敬語の世界でいうと、私がすごく今アメリカで住んで5ヶ月と思っているのが、アメリカ人にとっての敬語、例えば今日、 朝起きて散歩したときにみんな、はい、Good morning, Good morning, how are you? それが非常に優しくて低調な言い方に聞こえるわけですね、アメリカの中で。ですからそれが私にとってのアメリカでの敬語に当たると。だから日本人もそこは大して変わらないような感覚だと思うんですよ。日本に、私ずっと行政で暮らしてきてもう32年。で、そのうち18年間管理職で課長、部長でやってきましたから、まあ、どうしてもその仕事になりますと、議員ですね。ローメーカー。話すということは全て敬語なわけです。丁寧な言葉で、どんな議員であっても。ですから、それは自然とそういう言葉になるわけでございます。それが一つ目。あと、書き言葉について言えば、今こういう仕事になりましたから、いろんな方から、日本にいた、例えば、自治体国際協会のクレアの本部にいる方で、何人も外国人の方がいらっしゃるので、そうすると、離任するときにメールをいただくと。でかなりですね、今、AI 翻訳がありますから、でおかしいなと思うのは、昔も今も変わらないですけど、やはり助詞の使い方。ちょっとだから本当に今ビジネスレベルでって話がございましたけど、田臥先生から。やっぱりそこは助詞が一つ間違えると、こうやってちょっと今日本語で喋って申し訳ありませんが、例えば助詞が一つ変わるとですね、話の意味の内容が、例えば120度ぐらい変わってしまう。全く逆にはならないんですけど、120度ぐらい変わってしまうことがよくあります。例えば助詞の使い方でよく使われますのが、昔から日本の言語の教育でよく使われますのが、英語で言うと、An elephant has a long nose. Do you know the meaning of that in Japanese? 象は鼻が長い。これは象は鼻が長い。失礼します。先生の前で失礼します。これは私が都庁に入った結構比較的まだ経験の若い、5年とか10年ぐらいの人にちょっと添削をするわけですね、上司として。その時に象は鼻が長いって知っていると聞くんです。そうするとちゃんと説明できる人間はほとんどいない。象はっていうのは主語がサブジェクトで、象は鼻が長い。not subject。象。象はっていう位置を示している和はですね。で、鼻が長いが主語述語の関係なんです。それがやっぱり分かってないと正しい日本語のビジネスレベルのは書けないかなと。すいません、ちょっと日本語ですいません。以上でございます。
ありがとうございます。大切なところですね。上司。
上司。
Yeah, I mean, I understand Wa and God now, and I think it was a solid 15 years before I really understood the difference. And I feel so sad for like new students of Japanese. I feel like if I could just explain it better, they would get it. They would not. They'd still be confused. But I think the other side of that coin too is like, many of my Japanese friends, they speak English very well, but they still mix up the and And I think we should remember, like when we're learning Japanese, even if we're going to mix up wa and ga, it's always going to be that way for us. And I think it's important to like be okay with that. You know? Yeah, on my deathbed, wa, ga. Yeah, like, yeah.
Let me just interject a
Please.
new development in the world of
Please.
language education. Now, the distinction of reading, writing, speaking, and listening is now going to be a little bit different categorization called interpersonal, interpretive, and presentational. So when you look at the language in those three different world viewpoints, then the texting and writing academic papers, they're two different things. Right?
Yeah.
Correct? Interpersonal text, did you eat? Or tabeta versus お召し上がりになりましたでしょうか? Those kind of things, a very different categorization is gonna happen. So that's what I wanted to say. It's now the new development in the language learning world is that let's look at the world depending on not the skills, but the tasks and purposes of why we have different ways of writing and saying things.
Some more sociolinguistic.
Correct.
Yeah.
Reframing it, right?
Yeah, I like that a lot
Reframing
better.
Yeah.
Just vocabulary, grammar, but
Uh-huh.
comprehensive skill.
Yeah, so how important is it when you text? How important will the grammar be when you're texting your friends versus when you're writing a business letter?
Right,
to your
yeah.
Business person life.
Right, right. Oh,
I mean, I don't have necessarily the formal background on language learning, but I guess kind of the layman's version of that for me is how do I get there? And I think when it comes to the text, like when we're speaking in our native language, texting or that very casual communication is just like the shortest route
Right.
to
Yeah.
communicate. It's like, yeah, did you eat, right? Or even you ate?
Yeah.
Question
Uh-huh.
mark.
Eat, question mark?
Yeah, food question. And I think sometimes when I think of that in my in Japanese, it's very much, it's like, okay, I have this very complex thought in English, even though I should be more formal, I'm not quite sure how to do it. So what's the shortest route from A to B? So I guess what to say is, I guess moving towards that advance is moving out of that interpersonal and more into the higher categories, as it were.
And I think, I know we're coming up on time, and so I was just kind of thinking of some things, but I think one of the questions to answer, because we could talk all day about all kinds of situations here, but I think there's also the practical element of like, what kinds of learning opportunities are there really out there? Like, we've had a little bit of brainstorming earlier about how could we like effectively fund some like classes throughout the country, and where's a good pilot for that to happen in. But I think also there's 40,000 of us and counting in the United States alone. And I think a part of it too is like people don't know where to look to take a Japanese language course that matches their needs. Where do I take that JBT class? What if I do have the time and money to go to Japan for a month and do a language intensive? What are my options? Those kind, like that's a low hanging fruit.
The other
Yeah.
piece of that is, like, then what do you do with it? So I use Japanese every day on professional level when I worked at the consulate, right? The Dempo would come in and we'd read it, and you know, that'd be on my desk, and I'd be like, all right, I want to figure this out. I know Lynn and I were in this all together. So, you know, I was using professional level Japanese 5 days a week. I don't do that anymore.
Right.
You know, slowly I've stayed in the US Japan space, but I've moved out of needing to use the language on a daily basis. So here I am. I mean, even when I worked at my last job, I had a Japanese staff member, so we could go back and forth in Japanese. But now I'm working from home by myself in English all day. And then I show up here and I'm talking to, you know, different people, and I'm like, oh man, it is not coming out the way it used to. Where did it all go? You know, and I know if you don't use it. So then my question is, great. So we have these classes and we provide the resource, but we also have to provide them the motivation, right? And so for those of us that want to keep up our Japanese, then where do we go to use it?
Right.
You know?
Oh yeah, I have a question. So within JET program, like website, you guys have, sorry, I haven't checked, sorry, but you guys have checked the links of, you know, those like resources or, you know, the places you can.
Some chapter pages, most not, I would say. And that goes back to us. We talk about this all the time, duplicating work. We duplicate so much work, and imagine 19 chapter pages all with the same links, and you have to have 19 different people updating them. This has always been a problem in our community.
But we did have 2 national websites, right? So there's JETAA USA and USJETAA, and even there, there's duplicate efforts on
Plenty,
things.
yeah.
And we literally just redesigned our website last week. So it's still got that's a big deal, but now we have to actually fix it. Yeah, you put it up and you're like, oh man, there's a spelling mistake there. You know, we're like, oh, we didn't organize this right.
Yeah.
So this is a great time for us to capture all that, because we're in the space of rebuilding it, we can put those types of resources. And sort of, So I have like the AATJ jobs board, right? They have a jobs board for all of their teaching. And I just wrote Susan an email the other day and I'm like, hey, we should have these jobs on our jobs board. Like, can we, you know, how can we work together to make this happen, you know? So
Yeah.
just sort of centralizing the resources in a way that they're accessible to people and that they know that they're there.
Yeah.
Right? There's no line.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, everybody. Yes, we have to make sure that folks have time to set up the room for the next session. What's up, Lynn?
And for anyone that is looking for a Japanese organization and their Japanese skills are less than adequate. My Japanese is self-described as really kuja Nihongo. And, but it's interesting, if you are working for that type of organization, you'll be surprised that they'll find other ways to use you. Because all the people that I work with know that I cannot speak very good Japanese, I cannot read, I don't have a high reading level. They then want to take advantage of my English skills.
Right.
So they will then write something in this, please check this. And then they'll try, I need to practice my English. So we'll do that kind of thing. So for anyone out there that's still thinking about going into those types of positions, there's hope. You can get them, and that's how you can make an impact and contribute to your office.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
The young folk?
Young folk, yes.
Thank you.